It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Sara Seling, and as part of the Uveal melanoma in the community session, which is, arguably, I think unashamedly, one of the most important sessions we have for this meeting, bringing together thought leaders, patients, patient advocates all together to talk about uveal melanoma in the community. And so no better person to start such a dialogue than Dr. Sara Seling. So Sara is the co-founder and director of the Melanoma Research Foundation's Community United for Research and Education Ocular Melanoma. She is also a very accomplished associate physician, Department of Internal Medicine, Division of Global Health Equity at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, and is an instructor in medicine at the Harvard Medical School. And I'm sure, as Sara will tell you, she became involved in ocular melanoma when her husband, Dr. Greg Strax, was diagnosed in 2006, aged only 34. So partly as a result of that, both Sara and Greg became fierce advocates for uveal melanoma, and have really galvanized, I would say, not only the community of the United States and the patient community, but also the global community to focus our efforts on treating and improving the outcomes in ocular melanoma. So I'll hand over now to Sara to give us a talk, Uniting the OM Community, Keeping Our Eyes on a Cure.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joshua, for that introduction, and just thank you so much for including me in this meeting. I am thrilled to be a part of this and to learn from others, and it's big shoes to follow Dr. Orloff, so I will do my best. I will say, though, that as I'm trying to share my slides here, can you see my slides now? Can you all see my slides?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's a really good transition from the end of Dr. Orloff's talk about the community that we find ourselves working in. And I think from the patient and caregiver side of things, it's a community that we wouldn't have chosen to go in. So there's a little discrepancy as, I wear different hats because I am a physician, but I'm also in this context a caregiver. And I think as a patient or caregiver, this is a community that we didn't choose to be a part of. And yet what an amazing community to be a part of with such dedicated researchers and clinicians from a wide range of fields, and just amazingly dedicated patients and caregivers. So it's just a real honor to be here and to be a part of this community. So I thought that I would spend a little time taking you shortly through my personal journey related to ocular melanoma, and then talk to you about some work that we're doing through CureOM. And then the last part of my presentation will be talking with you about the Vision Registry, which I will hope many of you will be eager to get involved in from different perspectives. So we'll go through that at the end of the presentation. But just as Dr. Joshua mentioned, my entry point into the ocular melanoma field was because of my husband, Greg, who you can see here. He was diagnosed with ocular melanoma when I was a fourth-year medical student, actually in the middle of interviewing for residencies. And I had not heard of uveal melanoma as a medical student, and so it was a real crash course and a pretty scary one for us. There wasn't a website with any information. There weren't patient gatherings. There weren't educational resources at the time that he was diagnosed that we could access. And we asked his ocular oncologist if he could connect us to another patient or another couple our age to understand, what to expect. And he didn't want to do that. And we've remained dear friends with him. I have the utmost respect for him, but he didn't want to connect us because he was afraid that there were so many different outcomes, and prognostic biopsies were just in the early stages, and he didn't want us to get scared by talking to another patient. And so we were just really isolated and alone. And we just started building community and started advocating for Greg. It was 1 year after his primary eye tumor diagnosis that he was diagnosed with liver metastases. And that's really, I think, when our advocacy for Greg went into high gear. And a lot of patients saw what we were doing and came to us asking questions. And we thought, well, let's put the advocacy we're doing, for Greg, and let's make sure that it's benefiting the entire community. And that really was the foundational moment, really, when having that discussion with a couple other patients for the CureOM initiative. And this is a quote actually from a dear friend and colleague, Keith Flaherty, who some of you may know. He's in the United States at Mass General Cancer Center. And I think what I realized was what we as patients and caregivers were feeling, this isolation, this fear, this lack of resources. From Dr. Flaherty's perspective, clinicians were feeling it too. And so this is a quote from him: the ophthalmologist who treated it didn't know the oncologist who treated it or the researchers who studied it. And so I got a sense from the team of physicians treating Greg and with whom we were working that they felt scared and isolated too, and they wanted to be able to do more for patients. And so it sort of seemed like they were feeling the same feelings we were from the other side of the exam table. So it was really with those sentiments that we went into founding CureOM. As you heard, it stands for Community United for Research and Education of Ocular Melanoma. And the CureOM initiative is under the umbrella of the largest independent melanoma organization in the United States, although CureOM has more of a global focus, I would say, than the larger MRF, which is starting to be more global. But our mission statement really mirrors the mission statement of the Melanoma Research Foundation. So it's trifold: research, education, and advocacy. And we've really tried to build the CureOM program around those pillars. And so hopefully I can tell you a little bit about what we're doing in each of those areas through this presentation. And you can see Greg there when he was being treated for the primary tumor, as you heard, in 2006. And with his Starbucks cup, and I will just say that he was a Starbucks addict, although I presume that has nothing to do with his disease, but it always makes me smile to drink Starbucks. And so just to zoom out a little bit, one of the reasons we thought that putting CureOM under the umbrella of the MRF could be a good thing is that MRF was actually established in a very similar way to CureOM. And so this is Diana Ashby and her husband. And it was Diana and her husband who founded the Melanoma Research Foundation in the early days of melanoma, when there were very few treatments. And in 1996, and Diana really wanted to raise funding for research and support patients, and saw a need in the community and a real vacuum in the community. And by the time we learned about the Melanoma Research Foundation, they had really made a mark in the field. And we thought that by situating CureOM under that umbrella, we could help get the ocular community a bigger megaphone, if you will, because it was sort of, at the time, we felt kind of forgotten or in the background. And so from those early days of feeling so isolated and alone and without hope, I thought I would just share with you some photographs over the past several years of where we are now and the community that comes together for, walk, run races to raise awareness and to fundraise for research. And you can see a picture in the middle for Hill Day, advocating for issues that are important to ocular melanoma patients in Washington, D.C. You can see pictures from different galas where we've been able to honor, very important and dedicated people in the field. You just heard from one of them before me. And you can see the way that this community has come together over the past couple decades has just been remarkable. So I think the backbone of the CureOM program is really around the patient education and support piece. And I think we've really built this, from the ground up. We started with the things that Greg and I needed in the very early days. And we have a patient steering committee, and they help us, keep our fingers on the pulse of what patients need. And so we're always wanting to do better. We're always wanting to make sure we're meeting the needs, understand where we're not, and do better. The backbone of our patient education and support programming is an annual Eyes on a Cure symposium. And this, we partner with different academic institutions, mostly to date in the US, although I'll talk about a couple caveats in a minute. And we try and move it around the US to make it more accessible to patients, this 3-day meeting. And we also move it around the US in hopes that we can help connect and build different centers and help promote maybe or incentivize or catalyze different centers to maybe want to become centers of excellence for uveal melanoma. Then throughout the year, so that's an in-person event, then throughout the year, we have CureOM webinars, Ask the Expert series, and we try and round out the educational needs of patients throughout the year. We have a number of different print materials, which we can send free to patients or clinicians' offices. We have virtual support groups. I know that we have some folks join us from Australia periodically for the virtual support groups. And we have Vision, which started as a registry. We're building it out into a more full platform. I'll talk about that a little later in the presentation. I did want to highlight, though, one of the good things I think that COVID helped us do was in November of 2020, as some of you may remember, we were able to have a virtual international collaborative patient meeting. And I think this was phenomenal. We got a lot of really good feedback. We had different geographic tracks for patients. And it was amazing to work with you all on this. And so would love to think about, well, what's the next step in that partnership and what needs to happen at the global level versus what needs to happen at the local level. I think we can put our heads together to think about what some of that collaboration could look like. More recently, we just had this year's patient meeting in partnership with Moffitt Cancer Center in Florida, and that just wrapped up. And that was a really powerful meeting. It was our first fully in-person meeting since COVID. And then we have announced that our next patient meeting will be in May of 2024. Hopefully that gives you all time to hopefully get up to the US. I know it's a very long flight, but we will have partners, Mass Ioneer, the Massachusetts General Cancer Center, and Dana-Farber, and we will partner this over the weekend with a Miles for Melanoma event in hopes that we can get a really good CureOM showing there to raise awareness and funding for research. And these are just a few pictures from our most recent patient meeting. We had part of the agenda, we called it Science Sunday, and we had a number of different researchers kind of give brief lay talks to patients to let them know about their research. And then we actually took patients with a number of researchers and did some tours of labs. And I think this was phenomenal. And one of our goals as a patient advocacy organization is really to think about how do we build strong partnerships with patients and their families and the research and clinical communities. And I think this was a great opportunity, and hopefully during my talk I can talk about a few additional ways that we're trying to do that, but always wanting to think outside the box and innovate. And we're all in this together, and we need everyone's perspectives at the table to make a dent in this disease. And so how can we really do this effectively? And I think the patients really love this. And I think it was really valuable for the researchers to interact with the patients as well. We have a number of awareness and early detection campaigns. So we have #IGetDilated campaigns, which in the US we do in November because that's a time when people's medical funds are sometimes running out for the end of the year. So reminding people to get an annual dilated eye exam. We also do that in May, Melanoma Awareness Month. And so you can see some of the materials that we've used for some of those awareness and early detection campaigns. And then our advocacy program, really, we think about it in 3 buckets. So advocating for research, access, and awareness. And around research, we have done a lot of advocating and continue to advocate for more funding for melanoma research. And within that, more funding for rare melanoma research as well. And so in the US, the Department of Defense, and I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head, some of you may know them better than I, but we have been able to, with others, to advocate for increasing cutouts for melanoma research within the Department of Defense research bucket. And over the past couple of years, we've seen a significant increase in funding for rare melanomas as well. And so we consider that a win, and we'll keep asking for more. We've also had partnerships with in the US with the National Cancer Institute, the National Eye Institute, and continue those partnerships in a number of different ways. You'll hear about some of those as I talk about our meetings and the registry. And then access. So thinking about, for these patients who often have to travel long distances, what does that mean? And how can telehealth help uveal melanoma patients? What does that look like? And how can we advocate in different geographic areas for patients to have access to telehealth, access to clinical trials? And so our advocacy team is, helping to think, what do we do? What do we need to advocate for to make this possible? Mainly, at this point, that's in the US, but would love to think, what are those threads and themes that are international? And, is there an opportunity to do international advocacy? And then awareness, so partnerships with organizations like the National Organization of Rare Diseases and other rare disease coalitions. And then on the right, you'll see, this was January 2020, right before COVID hit. We actually had the first ever rare disease listening session at the Federal Drug Administration, the FDA in the US, their very first listening session on uveal melanoma. And I think there's some real potential for follow-up there. Unfortunately, it had to go on hold because of COVID, but we're picking that back up now to understand what the FDA needs to really better support the ocular melanoma community. And then the research we support. I often like to frame this with a quote from Greg. And this was a quote that he actually stood up in front of the researchers at the very first science meeting that we planned back in 2009, I guess. And so this was Greg talking to all of these researchers, thinking about his own care, but also thinking about the care of other patients and what the community really needed at the time. So he said, "We have a vision. We want a team of experts to focus on ocular melanoma. The more minds we can bring together to look at OM, the better result we might have. The team, no matter what academic halls they walk, approaches they use, research they are pursuing, are willing to collaborate, push the limits, take risks, think outside the box, be aggressive yet safe, be passionate and integrative." And I think, obviously for many reasons, I wish Greg were alive today to see many things, but I think he would just be so thrilled at the progress in this field. We are making progress, as we just heard from Dr. Orloff, in many ways, but the progress around the collaboration and the teamwork and pushing the limits and all of these things that Greg called out here, I think these are the things that are helping us move forward and are allowing us to accomplish everything that Dr. Orloff went through in her talk right before mine. So we try and keep this in mind as we, build our research initiative within CureOM. So we have different components of our research initiative. So one is peer-reviewed research grants. So to date, we've given out a little over $2.4 million in research grants. I'll talk about that briefly in just a moment. We have different scientific initiatives. The main one that I thought I would highlight is the Cancer Genome Atlas project and the advocacy we did to get uveal melanoma included in that. We have annual science meetings, and as I mentioned, partnerships with different organizations, including the National Cancer Institute in the US and the Society for Melanoma Research, and then I'll speak about the Vision Registry. So the CureOM grants, again, are peer-reviewed, and we have different levels. So we have a CureOM Team Science Award, and we actually have one open right now. So I want to make sure everyone knows about that, who may be interested in applying for that. We have Established Investigator Awards, Career Development Awards, and then we have Medical Student Awards. And this has been thrilling. I think in the past couple of years, we've had 6 or 7 medical students get awards focused on uveal melanoma. And here I was as a 4th-year medical student when Greg was diagnosed, and I hadn't even heard of the disease. And it's amazing now to see, people in training interested in this research area. It's I think just amazing for me to see that progress on the research side. So you can go to our website and you can search all of the grants that we've given out and sort of see all of them. I thought it would be too much to put on a slide to list all of them, but you can find them on our website or email me and I'm happy to send you information. The one award that's open right now, though, I really wanted to bring attention to, feel free to email me, or the information is on the website. This is, it's called the CureOM Options Bring Hope Team Award in honor of Lindsay Zubek, who is an ocular melanoma patient. Her friends and family have come together to fund a team award, and they want it to be focused on something that would not be making advances that could impact treatment that would not need patients to have a particular HLA type. So Lindsay is a patient who is not a candidate for TEBI, and her family wanted to be as broad as possible in the research that they're funding, with the caveat that they wanted, some research that could benefit their daughter. And I think that family will be on the review committee. We have a patient and caregiver review committee that reviews alongside the scientific reviewers and provides feedback. And we always hear from our scientific reviewers how gratifying it is to work with the patient and caregiver reviewers, and how it really helps their own perspective when they're reviewing grants. So these grants are due July 17th, and I'm happy to answer questions offline about that. And then, just briefly, it was really an amazing opportunity to work with the National Cancer Institute to be able to get uveal melanoma into the Cancer Genome Atlas project. And I think that foundational work, while it doesn't tell us everything, I think is really important. And I think a lot of, current studies and hypotheses have a foundation in that work. And it was us doing the initial advocacy, and then it was really the field coming together and being willing to share tumor samples. We had to get together a large number of tumor samples in a very short period of time, or they were going to move on to include a different cancer. But we were able to do it fast enough, and uveal melanoma got included in it. And so I just think that was a real win for the field. And then these are just some pictures over the years of our scientific meetings. We like to bring different disciplines together in a room and think about how can we use a meeting to do some disruptive innovation. We want to have some presentation of research and science, but what do we really need to do? What is the question that needs to be asked? What's the discussion that needs to be had? How do we promote collaboration? How do we promote sharing of cell lines, development of mouse models to really advance the field? And so that's always how we're thinking about developing the next agenda for the science meeting. So I'm always taking suggestions along this. And I hope for those of you who are researchers and clinicians in this field, that you might be able to join us in November in Philadelphia. The next meeting is November 6th. It's the day that SMR starts. And then out of some of our CureOM global science meetings, we've had a couple publications that have come out of those, which I think is good to be able to be communicating with the larger field. And so coming back to vision, which I've mentioned a couple times, but I thought I would just present a few of our early data. So vision, having a patient registry is something that has been discussed in the field for many years, both on the patient side and on the researcher side. And I think the straw that broke the camel's back for us has to do with this young woman in the picture on the bottom right, Summer Heath. And Summer, I'm not sure if many of you are aware of a unique population of ocular melanoma patients in Huntersville, North Carolina, around Hopewell High School. And I don't think that it met the epidemiologic definition for a cluster per se. And so we use the term unique population. But it was a group of young women who had all gone to the same high school and all developed uveal melanoma in their late teens or 20s. And they found each other on social media, because the way that tumors are reported in the States, there wasn't really a registry that would have allowed the identification of these patients all in the same area because of how the tumors were being reported. And so at one of our patient meetings, Summer spoke about the cluster and the fact that she was really one of the only ones still alive, and the effort that she had gone to really understand this unique population and how much help a registry would be. And so that was really the straw that broke the camel's back, was Summer's advocacy. And since then, we've launched at least two inter-institutional registries. And the one that I'll talk about is the one that the Melanoma Research Foundation oversees, which is a patient-powered, patient-reported registry. But we also co-consent with a clinical registry, OMNI. And so hopefully we will be able to integrate the patient-reported data with the clinical data as we're collecting these data. So vision, so on the right, you'll see that's a screenshot of the landing page for For vision, if you go to visionregistry.org, you'll get to this page, and the little dots, if you hover over them, are patient stories for patients who are participating in the registry and why they're participating. You can see our main aims with the registry here: record global cases, advance understanding, and increase collaboration. We do have an online consent form. Patients can access this from anywhere in the world. And we have an independent institutional review board, or our ethics oversight, in the US. And wherever a patient is able to access this consent form and sign it, we are covered. And if patients have questions before or while they're reading the consent form and signing it, they can reach out to us and we can walk them through it. Once they log into the registry or the platform, there's a landing page, and we've populated that with a number of educational resources. And now we have, which I'll talk about, a clinical trial connector tool and a patient discussion forum that we've just launched. And patients also have access to the surveys. We have built this registry basically from scratch. So we've been working with an interdisciplinary team guiding us from a range of different specialties, including patients and caregivers. And Susan Vine has been very involved and given us a lot of important feedback, as has Dr. Joshua and others on the AOMA team. And so we're eager to actually have more patients from Australia and other parts of the world join the registry as they're able. And we have the nimbleness to add questions. We have the nimbleness to add surveys, to do different analyses. And so I think this registry is as strong as the number of patients who put their information in, the validity of the information they're putting in, and then the questions we ask of it, of the data. So last year we published our first data report on the first year. So we've just had the registry open for 2 years, and we're in the process of publishing our second year data report. So look out for that in the next month or two. We've just sent the graphs to the graphic designer. So I'm going to show you data that's about a year old now. And I just thought I would show you just a few examples, but this whole report you can actually access online, and I can send that out some way if that's helpful. But you can see how many people a year ago were participating in Vision. We're now up by a little over 100. Now I think we're a little over 430 people at this time. But a year ago, we were at about 327. And then you can see that's how many people have registered. And then there's a drop off of people who actually complete their personal profile. And then there's a drop off again for people who have completed the surveys. So we've done a lot of work with our patient advisors to understand, what's happening at these drop off points and how can we better engage and retain patients in the registry. And so we've made some updates and changes this year, and that will be implemented into this next year that we hope will make a difference. We ask patients if they'd like to be informed of research efforts related to OM. Would they like to be informed of clinical trials related to OM? And we've actually been able to target information, target emails to these people who want this information. And it's a range of, information that comes our way that we can, very much target interested individuals. And so we got, a pretty large response rate because they're the ones I think who are, hyper motivated for that. Some patient demographics, again, these are old, they're about a year old. You'll see the new ones coming up in the next month, but you can sort of see the age range. You can see the sex spread. And this was something we were hoping to make a dent in to recruit more males. But you'll see in our latest data report that actually has stayed pretty much the same. So we have a little more work there. You can see the breakdown of country representation. And this has diversified a little bit more since last year, but I think we still have some work to get other countries involved. Of course, it's only available in English right now, but we're eager to translate into other languages to make this available for non-English speakers. We ask patients a number of different questions. So I think just in the time that we have tonight or tomorrow morning for you all, I'll go through just a quick smattering just to give you a sense, but then please feel free to look at the full report. Reach out if you have any questions or, if you'd like to have a discussion or have thoughts about any of this, and look for the new report as well. But one of the things, from an advocacy organization perspective, we think about our financial considerations. So especially, up until a year ago in the US where there was nothing FDA approved for metastatic disease, what kind of financial burden is this having on patients? So I think, we asked them again, and now we have more patients in the system, we'll have more robust data, hopefully. But it's interesting, I think, from my perspective, that so many people said financial considerations did not make it difficult to receive care. It'll be interesting to see how that holds up over time. That was something a little unexpected. I think will also be interesting to see a breakdown geographically, different countries with different health systems, et cetera. But, something for us to think about as an advocacy organization, ways to support patients in different ways. Then if you look at the breakdown of primary diagnosis, you can see kind of the percentage of uveal, the different types of uveal melanoma. And then you can see the years that people were diagnosed, which I think is important to contextualize some of the questions in the surveys, particularly this next question I'm going to talk about, which is biopsy of the primary tumor. And I'll present the questions the way that we asked them up until last year, but I hope in this new iteration, we asked the question slightly differently. So I hope that we'll have a little more clarity when we're presenting the data. So we asked patients, were you offered a biopsy? So you can see the breakdown. The majority of patients said yes, but still 35% of patients said that they were not offered a biopsy. And then did they have a biopsy? So out of the patients who were offered, 57% said that they had the biopsy. 43% said no. And you can see some of the reasons that patients reported why they chose not to have the biopsy there. We then asked patients if having the biopsy influenced their treatment and care. And you can see that breakdown there of how it influenced their treatment and care. I think there's a lot to dissect here, and I hope the way we sort of edited this question slightly, we may be able to analyze this slightly more robustly moving forward. I think interestingly, related to patient care and patient care recommendations, when you ask the patients who had a biopsy, retrospectively, how likely were you to make the same decision? 88% say that they were very much likely to make the same decision. When we ask the same question out of patients who did not have a biopsy, you can see that there's some more decision regret among that group than in the group who had the biopsy. I think that there's some follow-up questions that we can ask these patients to really understand these choices a little bit more. But I think, this can tell us about some recommendations potentially from the patient perspective around treatment and care at this stage of the disease. And then we did ask this both of patients with primary and metastatic disease, but I think I only have it here for primary disease, just to show some of the other types of questions that we asked. So we asked, about different support services that patients may have used at the time of diagnosis. There's data showing that patients have felt that they have not received the supportive services that they would have liked to have received at the time of diagnosis. And so based on some of that, data in the literature, we thought this would be important to dive into a little bit more. So I think this will also be important to look at geographically, understand maybe how things are working differently in different parts of the US or different parts of the world. And then I think from that, we can make some recommendations again on clinical care, supportive services that should be included from a patient perspective at the time of diagnosis. And then we asked them the distance to travel for treatment. So this is for primary disease, and you can see kind of the breakdown here. I think one interesting thing that, could be predictable is when we see that when we have patients answer the same question with metastatic disease, patients with metastatic disease are traveling farther. So we'll see that in just a minute in a slide. And I think this is the last slide for primary disease. We asked the same question of patients with metastatic disease. We asked them to rank their priorities of topics that they're thinking about when making decisions about their care. And you can see how those were ranked. So on the left side, this is the percent of time that topic was ranked first as the top priority from the patient perspective in making decisions about care. And on the right side, this is the percent of time that particular issue was ranked in the top 3 by patients. And I think this is interesting to see some consistencies between primary disease and metastatic disease as well. But long-term survival, experience of the medical team, and then when you look at the top 3, impact on family, comes up to the top. And, you know, for the top issue, long-term survival and experience of the medical team in OM, you know, really took over all the rest. So then a few slides looking at metastatic disease. So at the time of diagnosis with metastatic disease, you can see the breakdown of where patients reported the first metastasis that they experienced showed up. And then you can see the first treatment that they reported having at the time of diagnosis with metastatic disease. And then this, and of course now our numbers are smaller in the metastatic group. So with this next analysis that's coming out in a month, it'll be most of this plus some new analyses around quality of life and stratifying by different components. But I think it'll be interesting to see if and how these analyses have stayed the same or if they've changed as we get in more metastatic patients, because I think this was based on somewhere between 20 and 30 metastatic patients. And so you can see the breakdown of travel here. And then again, we asked patients with metastatic disease the same question about ranking issues that that are impacting their decisions about care. And here you can see again with metastatic disease, long-term survival experience of the medical team in OM continue to be at the top. I think it's interesting to see what has risen to the top more in this setting than in primary disease settings. So the ability to obtain care closer to home has come up as more important than in the primary care setting. Does not preclude future treatment options and impact on family. I think those, you know, you can hypothesize in the metastatic setting could, you know, be much more important to these patients. So I think some future work that would be helpful for us to do is to kind of dive in to understand some of these components a little bit better and how they're actually impacting decisions and care. What does that look like, and what do these conversations look like that patients are having with their providers? And then we looked at quality of life. We used the FACT-G for this, although moving forward, we're going to look at it a little differently. We're going to break it down into the different sub-themes. And I think we have a depression scale that we'll be reporting on as well. But this is sort of one time point during the first year. We asked everyone to fill out the FACT-G. And you can see the mean between patients with primary disease and metastatic disease is quite similar. Of course, I mentioned that we have fewer patients with metastatic disease participating in this. So in this next iteration, we will be breaking this down a little bit more. We'll be looking at quality of life over time. We'll have multiple time points, hopefully eventually for patients, and be looking at quality of life by different factors, different variables. So quality of life by different treatments, by number of treatments, by geography. So that's what we're working on in the upcoming data report, and also looking at the subcategories within the FACT-G to be able to report on the different components of quality of life that are included in that. So, just a couple areas where we're growing in my last, I think I have a minute left. So we're working with a patient and caregiver advisory committee. Thanks to Susan and others who are on that committee. We take your input very seriously. And we're always just thinking about quality improvement, and we have the nimbleness to do that. Again, I mentioned thinking about how to improve recruitment and retention of patients. This is a longitudinal study. We need to keep them engaged. Thinking about how to integrate this into clinical trials. So where there are clinical trials that need to report out on PROs, we've started to go for some shared funding that could support Vision being the PROs with different clinical trials. And then I mentioned we've just launched 2 new tools. So we've just launched a clinical trial connector tool. So patients in the registry, their information will pre-populate this tool, and the backbone pulls from clinicaltrials.gov, but we have an interface that's much easier to use than that, pulls information that patients enter into the registry, and then it spits out a list of trials for which patients may be eligible, and patients can look at it on a map geographically. They can look at it on a table. It shows the distance between, their home or an address they put in, and it shows the distance between the closest trial to that address, so they can manipulate it a number of different ways. We also have just launched a patient and family discussion board. We are soon to launch a separate discussion board for clinicians and researchers to hopefully be able to talk throughout the year in between the scientific meetings. And then, as I mentioned, we're working on additional analyses for the Vision Registry. So this is just a screenshot of the discussion board. It looks very archaic in this picture. We are actually going through a facelift to the entire platform right now. So it will hopefully look and feel much more modern, although the functionality is still great, but we want it to look a little more friendly and bring you in a little warmer. And then here on the right is kind of the template that you'll see in the clinical trial finder, although if you're a patient who's entered in data, it will already have pre-populated these fields, but then you can manipulate them as you want to. And so this is a postcard that can be handed out in clinic. We also have a brochure that we can send to any clinics who want to promote this. And we're really building this out into a platform rather than just the registry, but with all of these other resources on the platform, the registry is one of the resources on the platform. So just in concluding, coming back to the personal, that's Greg's and my daughter there participating in Eye Patch Day a few years ago. And, you know, we are in this work. I'm in this work because I want to prevent other families from having to go through the pain and loss that our family has. I want other little girls to grow up with their dads there. I'm camping with my daughter and some friends this weekend, and Greg should be here, and he's not. So we want to make a difference. We want families to stay intact. We know we can do it. This is such an amazingly dedicated community, and we know working together, we can find a cure. We can cure OM. And so I'm just so grateful to the community of our funders and to the patients who come out and help us raise money for the registry and for all the work that we're doing. And just to all of you on this, you know, as part of this meeting. And I hope whatever, you know, walk of life you're coming from, if you're a patient or a clinician or a researcher, I hope you see yourself somewhere in here, and would love to have you get involved, would love to have you contribute, share ideas. And if you're interested, please reach out. And then I won't do this, but we had our 10-year anniversary a couple years ago, and we have a 10-year anniversary video that I was going to end with. I don't think I have time for that, but I can leave it with the organizers, and if there's a moment later in the meeting, feel free to share it, or you can find it on our website. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to hopefully getting to collaborate with many of you after the meeting. Thank you, Dr. Joshua. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was an amazing, very inspirational talk. Maybe there's a few questions online, and a lot of people saying thank you. And I'll just put one question to you because we are running a bit short of time, which is just say that certainly mask trials can be involved in, just to confirm that your trials are global and grants are global in nature, and that there's certainly Australian researchers could apply.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So this one that's open right now is definitely global. General MRF awards are usually not global. I advocate for the Cure OM ones to always be global. So this current one is, and if someone wants to apply in the OM space internationally, have them reach out to me if they're not sure. And yeah, I always advocate for the Cure OM ones to be global, but often the general MRF ones are not. But the one that's currently open, due July 17th, is open to international collaborators, researchers.
Yes, and
the registry, was that related to the registry too?
No, the registry. I was just going to add, from Australian perspective, we're working with. It's been a long process, but we're working with the local ethics to make sure that we can promote that within hospitals in Australia, because we have to obviously get ethics approval to promote that, even though from a patient perspective point of view, the consent is on the website, so a patient can certainly go to the website. But for myself and my nursing colleagues, to encourage that to happen, we're nearly there with just getting that final piece in place. It's taken longer than I would have liked, but we're nearly there, and so we'll certainly be promoting that at the coalface within the hospitals. So thank you very much. I'll now pass on to Susan, who was obviously mentioned in the talk. Susan just has done such an incredible amount of work for ocular melanoma in Australia. I don't know where to begin. I will just give the brief introduction, which sort of really understates her work in the area, given that she's sort of almost at her computer for hours every day, helping people and setting up things for patients. But Susan was diagnosed with ocular melanoma in 2005 and subsequently underwent enucleation and has been supporting patients also who have ocular melanoma since 2011, and founded the Ocumel Australia New Zealand Support Group in 2017, which is the main support group for patients in Australia and New Zealand, and is very active in the space. So Susan, thank you very much for everything that you do and for your talk today.
You're welcome, Anthony. Thank you very much, Anthony. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to my presentation, Supporting Ocular Melanoma Patients. Firstly, I'd like to say what a privilege it was to speak after Sarah. 2011 was a big year for ocular melanoma support. While Greg and Sarah were founding Cure Ocular Melanoma, I was starting out supporting patients here in Australia and connecting to their online groups in the US. I'll share a little bit about my backstory. 2005 was the year my iris nevus was finally diagnosed with ocular melanoma. I lived my whole life with that freckle. Within 2 weeks of receiving referral from my optometrist, I had my right eye removed. That first weekend was when the reality of how rare ocular melanoma is and how little support patients received outside of our medical appointments. I don't know how I managed it, but I had one little eyelash sitting under the clear conformer that was supposed to be protecting my socket. I phoned the hospital, but short of driving to the emergency department, they had no suggestions or recommendations on who to contact for after-hours eye care. My situation occurred over 17 years ago, but similar scenarios are still occurring in a hospital emergency departments in 2023. I understand that ocular melanoma is rare, but when patients attend hospitals or medical centres after hours, the care and support that they need is often not available. And OMEs need to become their own advocates and educate the healthcare workers that have no knowledge about ocular melanoma. I first started supporting ocular melanoma patients in 2011, the year a small nevus was discovered at the back of my remaining eye. This time around, I experienced the waiting game, similar to how a choroidal lesion would be monitored. During the first few months, my ocular oncologist monitored my nevus with a comprehensive eye examination, which included a dilated eye exam, photographs, and ultrasounds of my nevus. This was to measure and track any changes that could occur, such as diameter, thickness, subretinal fluid, or orange pigment. Thankfully, my nevus has never shown any risk factors for a melanoma diagnosis. I moved from 6 monthly to annual checkups. At the time, my anxiety levels were very high and I prepared for the worst. In hindsight, the experience with my nevus gave me insight into what numerous uveal melanoma patients go through before being diagnosed. Family and friends offer the best support they can, but meeting another OME, be it online or in person, gives ocular melanoma patients a connection that is really hard to explain in words. You just know this person understands everything that you are going through. Although it's possible for people to walk through life with multiple nevi in their eyes, it is extremely rare for ocular melanoma to be diagnosed in both eyes. On the other hand, the regrowth of a tumour in an eye that has already had primary treatment has been known to occur, and often followed by enucleation or laser. As you can expect, patients feel like they are reliving their initial diagnosis. And again, there is no recognised mental health support for ocular melanoma patients. We have world-class ocular oncologists, medical oncologists, and scientific researchers looking after OMEs. And I know they recognise there is a missing section in the patient's healthcare teams. It's just that this professional link hasn't been created yet. Ocumel Australia and New Zealand Support Group I founded, now entering its 6th year, and to date has 243 members. We started as a small group of patients wanting to share support information with other ocular melanoma patients here in Australia. Peer-to-peer support has grown and changed greatly over the years. When I first started supporting patients, I believed that the interactions were a lot more personal. I would receive an introductory email and either write a reply to continue the conversation or to make direct phone contact with the patient. Those calls were often emotional, were life-changing for OMIs. To hear a voice that actually understood how scared and alone a patient felt could take a distraught person to a different space where they could take a breath and realize that there was a community of support. Nowadays, while we still have patients reach out independently and find their support group via searching, we also have multiple healthcare professionals mention Ocular Australia and New Zealand to their patients, sometimes even before primary treatments have commenced. Information shared by the presenters today truly is invaluable to consumers. Newly diagnosed patients still have a continuous flow of questions, but thankfully now there are patient-friendly resources for us to access. A few questions that continue to pop up in conversations are, how will this affect my vision? And how will this affect my vision, and how long will it affect my vision? As I mentioned earlier, I had my eye removed within 2 weeks of diagnosis, so I don't have first-hand experience to share. But thanks to supportive community in Ocular Australia and New Zealand, there are always numerous scenarios shared, all different because that is how ocular melanoma rolls. Over the past 4 years, our inaugural AOMA Summit was held in Sydney's. Patients have access to recorded segments on YouTube, the AOMA website, Twitter feed, and that is run by the Mask Trials and team. Cancer Council has released a PDF fact sheet for ocular melanoma. Most patients love the fact that information is easily accessible, but with saying that, quite a few find the information very confronting. I read comments from patients in many support groups, and there is a trend that they want more information from their treating clinicians. One thing that our healthcare professionals are concentrating on is their task at hand. The ocular oncologist's main aim is to protect our sight while killing the tumour. Medical oncologists' aim is to save our lives, and GPs treating their first OM patients are relying on Google to learn about this rare 8 in a million cancer that most of them have never come across before in their practice. Through my early days of internet searching, I found Melanoma Patients Australia support group, which met in person on a Thursday evening. To this day, thanks to Facebook, I can reach out and connect to past CEOs, facilitators, other ocular melanoma patients I had met through the organisation. This is also a reality of ocular melanoma support at the moment. We connect via Facebook. Hopefully, we will see some changes in the near future that allows ocular melanoma patients to receive extra support outside of their scheduled medical appointments. Although the rate of metastatic disease remains the same, thankfully, there are treatment options nowadays that may help patients prolong their lives and for some to become cancer-free. That last sentence I stared at for a while when writing this. This is the reality of some OMIs with metastatic disease. There is no approved treatments available, only trials. Kimmtrak was only approved in Australia in 2022. Some patients manage to stay in the moment and not to think, what if? But many want to be proactive and read everything possible. The majority always seem to find a little bit of info that knocks the wind out of them. While scientific research is continuing at an impressive rate, patients' anxiety about scans continues as well. More than once, I've dreamt about life after an ocular melanoma cure is found. Scanxiety is still going to affect newly diagnosed OMIs because 8 in a million is just too rare and people are so scared of the unknown. I'd like to thank Mask Trials for sponsoring this year's AOMA Summit. For ocular melanoma community, truly does appreciate the hard work you put into it. And to close, a reminder about melanoma occurs at any place at any age.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Susan. It's very, very helpful, I think, to everyone in the community. And there's certainly a thank you from one of the patients on the chat to say that really their lives have been enriched and very helped by the Ocumel organisation. So thank you on behalf of all the patients as well as the organisations. I now pass on to Michelle. Michelle's giving us a talk entitled "Two Eyes Aren't Always Better Than One," and Michelle, most of you may know her from ocular melanoma patient survivor who was diagnosed with a large tumour requiring urgent enucleation. She joined the Mass Consumer Advisory Panel to improve her understanding of the clinical trials process and be an advocate for melanoma patients. And Michelle is dedicated to improving the consumer experience for patients and people with a melanoma, both ocular and skin melanoma. And as you'll certainly hear, has a strong desire to make a difference in people's lives to ensure that people's voices are heard. So thank you very much, Michelle.
Thank you. My family history had me mentally prepared for breast cancer, so I was totally blindsided when I was diagnosed with ocular melanoma in June 2016. Hello everyone, I'm Michelle and I'm going to share some of my OM journey. And I do form part of that 2% for the Australian participants in the Vision. On 13th May 2016, we celebrated our 10-year wedding anniversary by climbing the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and then we're off to the Glenmore Hotel. It has a rooftop area with a harbour view, and we were making the most of the gorgeous weather and being in Sydney sans kids for a few nights. Unbeknownst to us, though, we would be returning to Sydney in only a few weeks' time under very different circumstances, and our vows in sickness and in health would be tested. Some weeks later, as I was returning, getting ready for work, I had a precursory symptom to what normally would have become a migraine, flashing lights. I hadn't had a migraine for ages, but my warning sign for the impending migraine is the lights. When they disappeared with no migraine, I went to work feeling relieved but confused at what I had experienced. 30th of May, my eyes are feeling like there is a veil over them or something. Maybe I'm tired. I've been stressed and really busy at work, so maybe that's all it is. Driving home from work that afternoon, I covered my left good eye to see what I could see. What I couldn't see was terrifying. I only had a small part of vision in the bottom of my eye, as if I was blindfolded, save for about 10%. I told John that I thought there was something wrong with my eye, as I couldn't see properly out of it, and my vision watching television that night was clearer when I covered my blind eye. John didn't appear too concerned, but suggested that I phone the optometrist the next day. I'd already decided to phone them, as I was hoping I could get an emergency appointment. Why can't I see? Why haven't I noticed it before? How long have I been blind for? Was I blind in Sydney? Why didn't I think to cover my good eye before now? Wow, isn't it amazing that if I've been blind for a while, my good eye has compensated so I haven't noticed? 31st of May. When I was leaving for work that morning, John held up his hand and asked me how many fingers he was holding up. I frustratingly told him that I couldn't see his fingers. I could only see a portion of his wrist. He kissed me goodbye and reminded me to make an appointment with the optometrist. I rang my optometrist at 9 and asked if I could see someone that day, but I was told I'd have to wait 1.5 weeks. When I explained my symptoms, I was booked in to see the locum at 11:10. As I was waiting, I had a moment where I let myself cry because I had a gut feeling that whatever it isn't good. The optometrist said that it was a medical emergency and that I had to get to the Canberra Eye Hospital ASAP because I had a mass pressing on my retina. He would write me a referral, which made them see me today. John insisted that he was driving me to Canberra despite my assurances that I would be okay, as I'd been driving fine up until that point. It was a decision I am grateful for. I packed up at work and drove home, although I'm not sure how, and nor do I remember the drive. I packed a suitcase, not knowing if I was going to be coming home the next few days because I wasn't sure what the next steps would involve. Surgery? What kind of surgery do they do on your eye anyway? Scans? We arrived, anxious to say the least. I filled in the paperwork, handed over my referral, and we waited. And waited and waited. Something I would become accustomed to and realise is the norm when seeing specialists. The first person I saw checked my eyes, performed an eyesight test, used eye-numbing ointment, scanned my eyes, brought in 2 different young 20-something doctors to check my pupil dilations and test results. Everything was normal, and then it was back to the waiting room. It felt like an eternity passed, and we were at last in the waiting room. Next doctor was Lady No Personality, who ran more tests, pupil dilation, more tests, and then Mr. No Sense of Humour boss came in with an ocular ultrasound machine. I made a joke to Mr. No Sense of Humour about whether he would be able to tell me whether I was pregnant. He was halfway through remarking that the machine couldn't tell me that, saw my face and stopped himself. We were again told that there is a mass pressing on my retina, which could either be an eye bleed or something more sinister. There were discussions about having tests and seeing a specialist in Sydney ASAP. More calls were made, but were unfruitful in emitting a response, as it was now after hours and no one was answering their phone. We drove home, each of us hoping that we weren't going to be told in the morning to get to Sydney, as it is a 6-hour car trip. 1st of June, the day I learned I had cancer. I finally got the call back from Canberra and was advised by my appointment had been made for Friday, 10th of June 2016 at 10 a.m. That was a whole goddamn 9 days away. It's better than 2 weeks, but still more than 1 whole week. My appointment was with Dr. Michael Giblin at Chatswood Private Hospital. I finally had a name for the man who was to become familiar to us and possibly tell us some really awful news. The final comment made to me about the appointment was that he is the best in his field. It was purely due to that odd comment that I Googled Dr. Giblin's specialty. Eye cancer specialist. Expletive. Just like that, my life changed. My life will never be the same, and quite possibly, nor will my eyesight. I phoned my girlfriend Katie, who was to go in for a double mastectomy that Friday. She was shocked, but we both managed to laugh about who did cancer better, her boobs or my eye. 4th of June. I was wearing my store-bought eye patch tonight, and Jack told me I looked beautiful. He said, even if I lost my eye, I'd still be beautiful. What a gorgeous kid we have. I hope he remembers that, because I might need his strength. Are we going to be told what it is, or do we have to wait for more tests to be done? If we have to wait, how long do we have to wait for? If it's cancer, has it spread? If it's spread, what then? Is the soreness at the top of my spine cancer? What about my face? That's sore too. Is that cancer? Should I start writing letters to the kids just in case? Should I see a counsellor or something if it is cancer? Why can't I remember words and stuff? Has it gone to my brain? Is it going to flood? If it's raining on Monday and hasn't flooded, will I be confident enough to drive? 10th of June, the appointment day. I'd already researched the 2 outcome options Canberra had given me, and I'd drawn the conclusion that I had an eye tumour and I would more than likely lose my eye. If I wasn't enucleated, whatever eyesight I had, I knew I had lost forever. Dr. Michael Giblin loves to fly planes and do magic tricks to entertain kids. I knew that before I'd seen him, as his waiting rooms have glass cabinets showcasing his interests and achievements. The appointment itself was a whirlwind. Dr. Giblin spoke quickly and was clearly a savant in his field. Sitting in the chair with my dilated eye, he approached, took a look in my eye and announced, I don't need any special instruments to see your tumour because it's massive. He called John over to have a look, at which point I wondered if he would be using any other instruments. He did. He used a long periscope tube thing that held a camera that snaked around my eyeball, and because my eyeball was numbed, I didn't feel anything. This instrument helped engage the size of my tumour. Dr. Giblin announced that he was 99.9% confident it was a very large choroidal melanoma and wanted to do my surgery ASAP. It was scheduled for 21 June 2016. I wasn't given anything to read or any other information in regards to OM to take home. 21st of June, operation day at the Sydney Eye Hospital. Steph had wanted to know if I would be allowed to bring my eyeball home in a jar. When I told her I probably wouldn't be able to, she asked for a photo instead. Somewhat shocked by my request, the anaesthetist said he would check with Dr. Giblin if a photo would be allowed. A sigh of relief escaped me when he reported back that it was okay. An enucleation only takes approximately 1 hour operating time and the patient is lightly sedated, which is how I came to wake myself up on the operating table by my light snoring. I returned to Dr. Giblin several weeks post-operation for a checkup and was booked in for a follow-up appointment in 12 months' time. I've had an appointment with him every 12 months since then to check the health of my remaining eye. During an appointment with Dr. Giblin, he told me that if I ever needed an oncologist, I should contact Professor Anthony Joshua because he's interested in OM and has been very involved in research about it. I took Anthony Joshua's name away with me and decided I need to have someone on my side now who was aware of the scanning protocols and also, if needed, where he would be familiar with my history. At this point, I had not found any Australian OM Facebook groups and I only found an American group. My internet research was also disheartening as I couldn't find much information about OM in Australia as it was largely overseas statistics and research. The feeling of immense relief following my first appointment with Professor Anthony Joshua remains today. I felt seen, I felt heard, and I felt hope. I had a way forward with new scanning regime, which involved blood tests and abdominal MRIs. And I have someone passionate about my disease in my corner. In May 2019, I attended the very first AOMA conference in Sydney. For the first time since diagnosis, I was surrounded by OM experts and OM patients. At that conference, I learned that my enucleated eye could be sent away for genetic testing. I was excited as I developed a hunger for information, and I knew that this needed to be done. My FISH test request was lodged at my next appointment with Anthony Joshua. August 2019, I'm a celebrity. My wonderful oncologist invited me to Sydney to be interviewed by Channel 9 to discuss ocular melanoma, AOMA, and the international collaboration. On the day of filming, I received my FISH test results, which categorised my tumour as being high risk for metastasis. I now have 6 monthly visits with Anthony Joshua, bloods and abdominal MRIs, as well as yearly skin examinations due to my fair skin and numerous early childhood sun exposures. June 2023, here I am, Ned, and doing what I can to get the message out about ocular melanoma. I haven't driven in Sydney since my enucleation, which makes me sad because I've lost my big city driving confidence. Maybe one day I will, but not yet. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for that, on Michelle, on many levels. Much appreciated. There's a quick question. I may just generalize the question from Gabrielle, relating to the fact that you found out about your diagnosis on Google. Hopefully that won't happen to patients ever again. How would you have preferred to hear about your diagnosis? How do you think the medical profession can do better in terms of making sure that the journey is smoother and not, from what you described, faced with a number of oh my God moments that you found out on Google?
Well, I understand, like I was angry at Canberra for a very long time, and it was only again due to my further research and, research of ocular melanoma that I understand now that only an OM ophthalmology specialist can diagnose ocular melanoma. So I think perhaps maybe more research needs to be done in educating eye specialists in perhaps being a bit gentler with their patients. And I think, and because I ended up getting my hospital results after I'd seen Canberra Hospital, and they'd actually written ocular melanoma. So I think I would have rather they'd say, we suspect it's ocular melanoma, but we're sending you to Dr. Giblin to get a confirmation.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds very sensible.
Yes.
Good. So I'd hand over now to Peta. So Peta is the Ocular Oncology Clinical Nurse Consultant at Royal Victorian Eye and Ear and a research nurse at the Centre for Eye Research Australia. She has had a career in ophthalmology and cancer nursing spans 25 years and extraordinarily motivated by improving patient care outcomes and raising the importance of nursing as well as allied health support for patients diagnosed with ocular melanoma. Thank you very much, Peta.
Thanks for the introduction, Anthony. And thank you to Sarah, Susan and Michelle today for sharing your amazing, courageous stories. It's been great to hear about the patient advocacy and the support initiatives that you're all putting in place. And I look forward to sharing those with our patients in future. Thank you. So clinical nurse consultants have been well established across many different cancer streams to date, both internationally and nationally. But in July 2022, I was given the opportunity, together with the Royal Victorian Eye and Ear Hospital and their growing ocular oncology team, to develop a CNC role within a very highly specialised cancer service. So this is a unique opportunity for nurse-led practice change at the Eye and Ear Hospital to enhance the quality of our ocular oncology service and also patient outcomes for those diagnosed with the rare cancer of ocular melanoma. So CNCs, we work across many different cancer streams. However, our practice really aligns to 5 similar practice domains, which you can see here. So to reflect upon the implementation of the timeline for my role development at the INE hospital, I prepared this timeline. So in phase 1, we saw the development of the ocular melanoma optimal care pathway. And without the time and dedication from our current head of unit, Dr. John McKenzie, and the executive leadership team at the INEA, the introduction of my role to the service would not have been possible. So after significant evaluation of the ocular oncology service at the INEA, it was determined that an OCP, or an optimal care pathway for ocular melanoma, was required. So through collaboration with the INEA and the Western Central Integrated Cancer Services, the OCP was developed. So it identified a number of service gaps, as well as critical time points, recommended care and treatment guidelines associated with an ocular melanoma diagnosis in order to achieve optimal patient care outcomes. So the draft was published in 2019 for this document, and work continues with the aim to eventually submit this to the Cancer Council of Australia. So in phase 2, in July of last year, we saw the initial scoping phase of my role commence. So this was a 6-month project. And during this period, as clinicians and as a team, we asked the following questions. Is our service on track to following the guidelines set out in the OCP? Do we provide patients with all the necessary information that they need on their cancer journey? How do our patient outcomes compare with those in other eye cancer clinics nationally and internationally? How can we improve our ocular oncology service delivery? How do we compare to other cancer services? Does our ocular oncology service align to the current Victoria Cancer Care Plan framework, as well as national safety and quality health standards? And which partnerships are important to strengthen patient care and service outcomes? And in January 2023, we entered the formal implementation phase of my role, and this is where we are today. So the CNC role at the INEA is currently funded at 0.2 FTE, or 1 day per week. And while the demands of the role are much, much greater than this, what we've achieved to date is significant. So in the diagnosis phase, I aim to be present with the patients during their initial consult with the doctor. As you're all aware, our patients come to us feeling extremely anxious. So the possibility of receiving a cancer diagnosis is completely overwhelming on so many fronts. So my role gives patients the opportunity to be listened to during this first phase. They can recap on their understanding of any discussions they've had with the doctor around the diagnosis and the recommended treatment plan. And I'm essentially that middle person between the patient and the doctor to help seek any answers to questions that patients may continue to have throughout their cancer journey. In terms of education, we now have extra support to recap on any medical information that's shared with patients along the journey. And we're not only giving patient materials, but also looking at ways that we can improve these, particularly with consumer feedback. In terms of support, we now have an opportunity to really get to know our patients well, and to understand their specific needs, which are not always communicated at the time of the initial diagnosis. But we know that this is really important and it's such a pivotal aspect to their treatment planning. So we can advocate for also and refer patients to important external resources such as Cancer Council Victoria and Rare Cancer Network. We also have improved capability now to work with our multidisciplinary teams through the diagnosis and the treatment planning phase, and particularly our social work team at the INE Hospital. And most important, the thing that I first set up was a point of contact for our patients. So they now can email me via an oncology service email at any time throughout their journey. So we've seen particular improvements from the period of diagnosis to treatment phase. So as we know, all new patients who are diagnosed with an ocular melanoma will be referred on to have baseline screening to rule out any metastatic disease. So this can occur at primary, just through their GP, through partner health institutions or even through regional oncology centres. So we've seen a huge improvement in the patient navigation through this phase, and also the retrieval of important documentation back into the eye and ear hospital records, which is really important for any follow-up consults. So the support has also, that I can give in this space, has also enabled our treatment times to align with the guidelines and timeframes that were set out in the OCP. So we've seen an increase in the number of patients that we now present to our multidisciplinary team meetings, and work continues in this space to improve the framework and the documentation of this. And through consultancy, both with directors of ambulatory care and surgical services at the eye and ear, we identified a need to appoint a surgical liaison nurse. So they commenced just in the past few weeks with the team, and they're responsible really for ensuring timely access for patients to their date of surgery. So we know that no new role comes without its set of challenges. So the things that we've learnt today are to be realistic in terms of the time available to my role, to identify individuals and resources within the organisation and external that can help me achieve my outcome, my goal, to ensure that the procedures for capturing patient feedback are constantly reviewed and considered, and also to look at who else outside of our organisation can help to highlight what difference my role has had on patient care outcomes and the service outcomes. So in the context of my role, I see impact to be the influence that I've had on the service provision within the organisation as a whole, to the staff and the direct team that I work with, as well as most importantly, our patients. So the journey's only just begun for my role at the eye and ear. So where to from here? So we'll look at how we can improve our supportive framework, what sort of tools we can use to capture any evidence that of patient support needs throughout their journey. We'll look at our survivorship care model and how we can better support our patients, not just during the treatment phase, but and beyond. We'll also look at how we can capture data into our new Safe Sight Institute Fight Tumour Blindness Registry, which has been set up to benchmark treatment and outcomes. And we'll also look at what nurse-led opportunities are available for my role to look at how we can improve patient care outcomes. So we know that better health outcomes are achieved when, as professionals and clinicians, we work with other services. So these are some of the existing partnerships we have, and we'll look to strengthen future partnerships with other organisations that are directly involved in cancer care. And I'm sure over time we'll be significantly adding to this list. So while it's too early to formally measure some of the impact that my role has had to date, the outcome of enhanced patient care through recent patient feedback to the hospital has been very encouraging. So I see my role to bring a ray of light to patients, their families and their carers during very difficult times, and the opportunity to help them navigate through the cancer journey from diagnosis through treatment and beyond. So even though ocular melanoma is rare, it doesn't lessen the impact on the patient. So today, to finish my presentation, I wanted to share with you a patient story. This patient was recently treated at the Eye and Ear Hospital for a choroidal melanoma. He had plaque brachytherapy surgery for this tumour, and he was also treated at the Eye and Ear as well as the Peta Cancer Centre. He was seen at Peter Mac for some further investigation of some screening outcomes that he received in the initial diagnosis period. So this is Hugh's story.
I was referred to the Eye and Ear Hospital due to the fact that I was seeing lines and curves in my left eye. Upon arrival and doing checks, I was then diagnosed with an ocular melanoma, and the choroidal part of it, I actually thought I had fluid in my eye, and that was all. So to go in there and find that out, it was like, okay, it's just, where to from now? What does that mean for my livelihood? What does that mean for my lifestyle? Where does it place you? Because you don't know what the possibilities, the outcomes are. The CT scans that I was referred to get come back with lymph nodes on my liver. They were worried about that my melanoma in my eye may have metastasized. I then had to go to Peta to get PET scans. They come back that it was lymph nodes, but they weren't of a great concern to them, that they didn't believe them to be malignant. So therefore, my wife then went on to email Peter Holly at the eye and ear, who then rearranged my timeframes with the eye and ear to see Dr. Otto Day. That put everything back on track. And I knew myself that my eye was increasingly getting worse. And that, I suppose, it causes a slight bit of anxiety because you don't know where your life's headed. They sorted everything out for us, rearranged everything, put everything back on track. And from there, I went in and had the operation. And also, because of the ongoing duration, you don't know whether it's actually working for at least 3 months down the track. They don't know until they inspect it again. But then you also think about where a whole lot of it may lead to. And also, it doesn't just impact yourself, it impacts your family too. That was more important to me. I'm very family orientated. So it's not a great ride for anybody, but it's a ride that, and it's a journey that you have to take. I think there's a gap between patient, hospital, and doctor. There's a huge gap, and this gap is now being filled by a clinical nurse that gets to meet you, gets to know you, and you can have contact with it at any time. And that, to me, that's huge. It's huge.
Oh, sorry. So thanks, everyone. Thank you to AOMA and Mass Trials today for the opportunity to present. And as I said, I look forward to just developing collaboration and partnerships with organisations, both nationally and internationally, that we've heard from today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. There's a couple of questions. I just want to add that hopefully you'll have a Sydney colleague very shortly. We're just going through that process. So there'll be 2 of you fighting the good fight, and we'll certainly be in touch when that comes to fruition, but we've nearly there. So right. Hopefully between the 2 of you, we'll be able to cover the country in terms of providing support to patients that need it. There is a question on the Q&A. Funding for nurse-led research opportunities may be an initial obstacle, but what kinds of research are you hoping to progress?
I think particularly in the avenue of just patient care outcomes, we are looking at a project at the moment specifically around just plaque brachytherapy and the patient experience through that. Obviously, we know that when patients are admitted to hospital, it's an extremely isolating time, especially if you're there for 3 or 4 days. So that's one project we're looking into. So it's really, my initial focus will be patient care outcome and experience.
Right. I mean, there's certainly other comments suggesting that we certainly need a national role, given the rarity of the tumour. There to be some sort of national initiative to help loud and clear the fact that the patients need nursing and allied health support. So we can certainly work on that with some of the advocacy groups to get the message through to Canberra. So thank you all very much for a very entertaining session. We've finished just on time. There's a 20-minute break. We're back at 11:30 for a very exciting session on uveal melanoma biology, chaired by Professor Brown. And once again, thank you to our sponsors who are on the screen at the moment. Thank you all very much for your attendance.